We're gonna give it a minute. And let's see. Good morning, everyone, as I'm kind of starting to get ready. Hopefully you're getting ready for your day too. Awesome. Okay, so it's 8:29. We're gonna give it a little bit of a second for people to jump on if they're interested. I hope you guys are having a good morning so far, at least where I am. The weather has been particularly nice, which is good. For those that are kind of listening now, if anybody's on, September is a great time for migration season. So if you are going to do bird watching at any point in time and going out and about and doing some bird walks, now is a great time to do it. So make sure you kind of take that into consideration as well. Okay, so it's actually 8:30, so we're just gonna hop right into it. Good morning, guys. Thanks so much for joining me. And yeah, so oh my goodness. Thank you everybody for listening. My name is Jolene. I am a songbird feeding specialist with Wild Birds Unlimited of Concord. And today we'll be talking about the bird feeding hobby kind of in its entirety. So whether or not you're just getting started in the hobby or if you're thinking about how to add on or don't really know what to do about general maintenance, we're going to be hitting all of those interesting topics. Sometimes they can be a little bit more mundane than others, but it's kind of important to keep things happy and healthy and enjoying the hobby as a whole. So if you guys have any questions throughout the presentation, I do see the comments. So good morning, everyone. I hope you're doing well. But feel free to drop a comment and I'll try and respond as we go on. And of course, you're always free to call the store and we can let you know what's up to. So with that, we're going to start right at the beginning. And let's assume some of you haven't even gotten a feeder yet, and you're kind of looking at what options to employ, where to put everything. So I'm just going to put a little bit of thoughts in your head. The sound volume is very low. Okay, can you guys hear me okay right now, or is it still a little low? Let's see, I don't know if I can, okay. Can you guys hear me okay? Because I see one person saying it's a little low. So I'm going to wait till I hear a response there. Okay, so if you guys can hear me all right, it could be the volume on your end. Okay, thank you guys. Just wanted to make sure. I appreciate that. Maybe possibly check your volume and make sure it's still kind of on. You might be able to upload it, or it might be the video specifically. So some general considerations to kind of think about as you're moving forward with bird feeding is, of course, location. Usually that's one of the first things people think about. They look outside their kitchen window or in their living room and go, you know, that would be a really nice spot for a bird feeder. So sometimes that's pretty straightforward. Sometimes you might want to go for a more open area or put it in the natural area. Some people like to have it in their garden area as it kind of just completes the nice aesthetic and a setup. Sometimes you definitely want to have it more visible from the house or from a sitting area that you watch pretty often. Maybe if you have a patio or a front porch that you'd like that feeder location to be. So maybe consider some of that as well as you're kind of moving forward with that first feeder. When you're setting up your feeder system, there's a lot of different ways to do it. A lot of people usually get started with a standard shepherd crook that they use from like Lowe's or something that they use a lot of their plants, their hanging plants or everything for. And they just kind of use that for their bird feeders as well. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a very good starter option, but sometimes if you have a heavier feeder, those do have a tendency to lean. So you could also look into different style pole systems that have a variety of accessories and hanger options that allow for more variability, which is nice. If you have a lot of trees in your area, a lot of people do have a tendency to hang from the trees, but keep in mind there are tree hooks, which basically are very large S-hooks that allow you to hang feeders from larger branches or certain types of hangers like that as well. Other people might get a rope and like swing it over a really large branch that they can kind of use as like a pulley system or anything like that as well too. So you can get kind of creative if you're also hanging it from a tree. Some people do go the wooden post route, like a 4x4 wooden post. These can look really nice with the vinyl outer skirt of the post as well too. But these can sometimes be a little bit harder to install as well too. So you've got different styles with more work for installation or less work with installation. It depends on how many feeders you plan on having. So definitely consider that, as well as kind of what we talked about, the weight of the feeder, if your hanger system can handle it, and also the height of the feeder. You're going to be going out here to fill these things pretty often, so you want to make sure you're comfortable getting up on a step stool, or if you have it at a low enough point that's easy for you to access. Plus, if you're just getting started, definitely consider the local wildlife in your area. I know that we call it bird food and bird seed and bird feeders, but there are plenty of other animals that will come over to say hello and check out the food options, such as squirrels, chipmunks, raccoons, possums, or deer. Depending on where you live, there could be some other animals involved. So if you have squirrels, be prepared. They probably will be interested in checking things out. So I always like to let you know that in case you're interested about any squirrel prevention options, or if you have issues with raccoons at night. These are all things to kind of consider and ask your local bird feeding experts some ways to kind of circumvent that from getting too out of control as well too. So when you're looking into a starting feeder, honestly, sometimes you want to think about what birds you're hoping to attract. Okay, so for some of you, let's talk about the cardinal. That's a very popular one here in the North Carolina state as well too. They're kind of everywhere if you have some nice shrubby habitat. So cardinals really enjoy feeding on the ground, and they like to feed forward. So if you want to get them up on a feeder, you want to have a feeder that has a good solid perch that also allows them to feed a bit forward. So hopper feeders like this one have that nice stable perch and make it a really easy option for them. That'll bring them up off the ground and give you good visibility of them as they're eating from the feeder. Certain birds like woodpeckers also like to cling rather than kind of just perching at a feeder like this. Not that they can't, but they're a little bit more comfortable in a different way. So depending on what bird you're looking for, you want to see how they kind of eat their food, because knowing that will help you figure out what feeder you'd like. There are different birds that like different types of food. So cardinals love seed, bluebirds love insects. So you're going to have different variables as well too. So knowing that bird that you're interested, like knowing cardinals definitely eat bird seed, is a great way to get started too. And as you're kind of looking around for different style feeders, making sure you have something that is easy to take apart and easily accessible for cleaning is also very helpful, because we'll be talking about that a little bit later on. That's very important for maintenance as well. So that starter feeder that we're talking about should be able to hold a variety of seed options. We'll talk a little bit more about the seed in a minute, but basically we're looking for something that can attract a variety of birds just in general, right? So the hopper feeders that I talked about a second ago, we're going to jump back here real quick, basically look like houses, or they have like a hexagonal shape, like six-sided, that basically store a lot of capacity. They have good perching options, and they usually have some good protection over top. There's also tube feeders that are a great option. These are also very popular. A lot of people like the looks of these. They do have smaller perches. So for example, those cardinals that we talked about would not really be interested in these smaller perches unless this type of feeder had a larger tray at the bottom that's easier for them to get onto. So think about that and keep that in mind as you're kind of looking. There are also seed cylinder feeders. These are basically food options that are made of seed into water-based gelatin. Overall, they're less mess, less waste, and you get longer viewing time of your birds compared to different styles of bird feeding. The only downside is sometimes this seed option is not always available at your larger box stores. So you want to make sure that you have the ability to purchase those from a certain location and it's not too difficult to get. For example, Wild Birds Unlimited has these seed cylinders, but you might not get them somewhere from, for example, Lowe's. So keeping that stuff in mind can be also helpful too. And of course, if you're just looking to get started for a little bit of fun or do something with the kids, a lot of people do kind of make their own recycled feeders. So if you have milk jugs, water bottles, soda bottles, you can look online. A lot of people have a tendency to make those just as something to get started. These may not be as durable compared to other styles of feeders, but they're definitely a really good option to try as well too, as you're just kind of getting started. So never doubt the ability to recycle some other things as well too. That can always be fun. So after you've got that kind of primary feeder, keep in mind that you might also notice there's a lot of other specialty types of feeders that basically fill another niche in the bird feeding system, right? So some others that you might be familiar with or you might have seen before include suet feeders, which are usually kind of, if you've seen them in another person's yard, they might look very similar to like a little green wire cage that holds the suet cake. Suet's just a type of fatty food that's very popular with woodpeckers who might not always go for just the seed in your feeders. Or if you guys enjoy the hummingbirds in the summertime, you might have seen a lot of nectar feeders, right? So those are made specifically for hummingbirds and their small size and small long beaks. You're not going to get a lot of other birds at that style feeder. So the different types of food that you put out, the more variety you have, the more variety of birds you'll also attract. Mealworms are a type of insect option that's easier for a lot of backyard bird feeders to put out for the birds to enjoy. Bluebirds are a huge fan of this, as well as like insect eaters like your eastern phoebes or other flycatchers. Peanuts are a great alternative to suet. If you don't like the suet, it attracts a lot of the birds like the woodpeckers and also blue jays. Peanuts are good either in the shell or out of the shell and can be raw or roasted. Then you got finch feeders like this guy here that attracts exclusively finches. So that's not the best feeder to start out with, but if you do notice over time you have a lot of finches, then offering that option would also be fun too to try and get more of their attention. And fruit and jelly feeders can be good, especially in migration for our area, but it's also better in kind of like cooler times when those options don't ferment as quickly. But they can be a great option for obviously orioles through migration, but of course cardinals, finches, woodpeckers, chickadees, they'll all kind of enjoy that option as a nice sweet treat. So these can be a little bit more higher maintenance or a little bit more difficult. So as you kind of start with that seed feeding option, then you can kind of consider different options to branch out to. So it all depends on who you have in your yard and who you want to attract as well too. So these are all other things to consider. Now that we've kind of touched those points, we're going to talk about what you want to put in your seed feeder once you've kind of figured out what style you want to go for. Now, this is just in general. I know I work for Wild Birds Unlimited, but I'm trying to help you as a whole here. Wherever you go to shop for birdseed, these are the things that you want to avoid. This top picture right here. Anything in a bag of birdseed, if you look at the ingredients, if it says it has milo, grain product, or grit, those are things that you're going to want to kind of back off from. Because if we look at this picture here, this red kind of dull colored seed, that's called milo. That's a weed seed. None of our birds here in the US really eat it, okay? Usually it gets kicked out of the feeder, it's all over the ground, and it just sprouts like nobody's business. It is not anybody's real favorite. So if you happen to have something like this already in your feeders, take a look at the ground and kind of see how much of that is just kind of scattered all over the place. From there, the only things in this kind of blend that the birds eat include the white millet, which is really only popular with your ground feeding birds like doves, juncos, and towhees or sparrows, and then the black oil sunflower, which is such a good option for a generalized variety of birds. And let's see how many of those we see in here. I see one black oil. I know there's another one over here. And I think there's one here in this corner. But the thing that attracts the most variety is the least amount of the ingredient available in this blend. And also grit is basically something that is added to a bird's diet to help digest their food a little bit more efficiently. They can access this well enough in the wild. You don't need to have this in your birdseed blend. So staying away from a blend like this and focusing on things such as black oil sunflower, which is an easy to break shell. It's highly nutritious due to the high oil content it has, and it attracts a generalized variety of birds is a really good option. And while I won't touch too much on any issues with like if you have a lot of squirrels or anything in your yard, the one thing I will say is that safflower is a great option to offer, as a lot of squirrels do have a tendency to find it bitter to their taste. So I like to call it like the first line of defense. It doesn't attract as much variety as black oil sunflower because it is a harder to crack shell, but cardinals love it, house finches love it, chickadees, titmice, you can still get a good variety while also hopefully dissuading your squirrels from checking out the feeders. So that is also a really good option to consider as well. We want to go for things that the birds actually enjoy. Now, of course, you can have just the black oil sunflower or just the safflower. That's never a bad idea. But if you want to attract more birds, the more variety of food that you have, again, we've talked about this, the more effective it'll be. So if you have a blend of like sunflower and safflower, and you can have some de-shelled sunflower in there too, like our Supreme blend, that's a really good option for a generalized variety. And basically, the more ingredients you add, the more variety you'll get. I'm gonna say that way too often, I know. So basically, as you kind of move forward, other things to include in blends like peanuts, white millet, fruit and suet nuggets are all a really good option. Fruit can be kind of tough in the summertime because it can get pretty sticky in certain style feeders, but it can be a great option to offer in the wintertime as well. The Choice Plus blend can be a really popular option that we have that a lot of people go for throughout the year, but also a lot in the wintertime as well too, because a lot of these extra ingredients. And if you don't like the fruit, you can always focus on a blend that doesn't have that. Or if you don't like white millet because you've tried it, then there's other alternatives too. So you have to find out what works best for you and experiment with what works best for your birds as well too. Now, if you have a bird feeder that is in a garden area or you like where it's at and you want to keep it pristine or as clean as possible, anything with a shell can sprout. So like obviously the if you've dealt with Milo before, that sprouts like nobody's business and it's hard to get out. Black oil sunflower can sprout too because it does have that shell, but you're gonna get sunflowers. So anything without a shell is not going to sprout. So there are a variety of blends like No Mess Blend, which has sunflower, peanuts, tree nuts, and other blends. Oh my goodness, other items depending on which kind you get, or also just sunflower hearts, which is just de-shelled sunflower, that are great options to keep in a garden area or things where you don't want them to sprout as well too. So you've got those options to consider as well. So once we've got our bird feeder, now we've got our bird food, we've got to figure out how to store it because storage is just as important. If you've only got a little bit of food at a time, it's okay to just kind of keep it in that bag and call it good. But if you start to have a collection of different types of food, or if you have a larger bag of food, it's important to consider the containers. If you're storing your food inside, you can use a plastic container or bin. It does not matter what kind as long as it's airtight. So if you've got an old like pet food container or something that's been cleaned out that you just want to use for your bird seed, awesome. If you're going to be storing your bird seed outside, I highly recommend a metal container of some kind because anytime you keep things outside, wildlife are able to access those things. So keeping the area clean and as inconspicuous as possible will reduce any squirrels, raccoons, or possible mice from checking out any outdoor storage as well too. Keeping your food in a cooler temperature will keep it fresh for longer, so you can have it pretty well for quite a few months. So cooler temperatures work best if you have it in a climate controlled area. That's all good. If you have food, if you have the storage capacity for it, you can freeze excess food as well, and that kind of helps keep it fresh for longer. If you don't have the option for cooler storage, that is completely fine. It's just one of those things where in the hot summer months, keep in mind, do not have too much excess food on hand at a time. Bird food is perishable, so it's good to keep that in mind. Heat, humidity, moisture can all be a concern. And just in general, so everybody knows, before any birdseed is harvested, there is always the chance of moths or weevils laying eggs in the seed. So that if you leave it in warm temperatures for a long period of time, those eggs will hatch and you could possibly be dealing with moth larvae or weevils. So you might see a lot of webbing in your bird seed or things like that as well too. It's more just obnoxious than anything, and we definitely don't want moths being scattered out through your garage. So keeping it in that container makes it easier to be stored. Keeping it in a cooler area keeps that from happening. And you also just have the chance of make sure you go through your old stock first. These are like self-explanatory things, but go through your oldest seed first before you use the new seed. And especially in those hot summer months, just use what you have Just get what you need, and it's when it's cooler, then you can start to have that extra back stock as well too. Hopefully that makes sense. I didn't quite I started over my words there, that's for sure. So, some people also ask, when should you feed your birds? And honestly, that's completely up to you. Some people enjoy feeding them in the summertime because there's a lot of nesting going on and there's a lot of fledglings going on, and it's a lot of fun to watch those things. Other people enjoy to feed them in the wintertime when the food is a little bit more scarce and you also don't have any trees blocking your view because all the leaves have fallen, at least where we live. So you get good visibility of your birds. And some people feed them year round because that's what works best for them. Keep in mind that as you feed your birds, we are not the only source of their food. They definitely still rely on their natural food options first. So berries, fruits, seeds, things like that, insects, that's what their primary focus is on. We've just got a really nifty, easy resource that they will use throughout the year. So whatever you provide will be good, but if you do want to think about things that help their nutrition values and everything, here are some things to consider. In the spring and the summertime is when nesting happens, so that's going to be a lot of eggshell development, bone growth, and feather growth because a lot of birds molt during this time of year. So food options like protein and calcium are great to consider. If you try those mealworms, that's a great option, or if you don't have any pesticides that you use in your yard, that's a great option for insects. You can also offer those peanuts because those are high in fat and protein, so they're a fantastic time throughout the year. Suet that has a bit more calcium is great. Or if you don't offer any of those things and you eat eggs at home, dried eggshells are a fantastic option. The way to prep those is you just rinse them out, put them on a baking tray, put it in the oven at 250 degrees Fahrenheit, let it heat up for about 10 to 20 minutes, depending on how your oven does. Basically, at least until the eggshell dries, and then you can kind of crinkle it up and you can scatter it through the yard or add it and mix it into your bird seed if you want to. Birds do recycle that way, so they will take advantage of those nice resources too. In the fall and the winter time, fatty foods are great because we're going to be dealing with migration, and we're also going to be dealing with a lot of cooler temperatures, which means the more fat that these birds have, the better their heat resources will be and their energy reserves. So things again like peanuts, suet, or fruit all have good fat or sugars that are great to kind of keep those energy levels up. So those are all great options to offer, but again, you can kind of stick with just your basics and what works best for you, and they will grab whatever they need from nature as well too. That being said, activity at the feeders does slow down when natural food is available. So in the fall, at least for North Carolina, it does depend on different locations, there is a lot of natural food available. It's hot, it's humid, and it's rainy. So that means that food goes bad like nobody's business. So you can slow down in that period, maybe only fill your feeders up halfway, because that is a thing you can do. You don't need to fill them up all the way. That's like impulse, but you don't have to. But basically, when you notice at a certain time of year, when there's a lot of natural food, that's when that activity is going to slow down. So keep that in mind for how much food you keep on hand and how much you're offering at a time. And another thing that some people like to keep track of is migration does happen usually in the spring and the fall. So that does bring different types of birds in your yard. And we do usually have different types of birds in the summertime than we do the wintertime. So that can also determine when you want to have your bird feeders out as well too. Now, when it comes to maintenance, again, we've kind of talked about how bird food is perishable, so you want to check on it at least every 1 to 2 weeks. This is kind of the part that nobody likes to talk about, and it doesn't happen all the time, but it is something to be mindful of. There is always the chance of mold, mildew, and food residue building up in your feeders, and I want you to consider the fact that especially during migration, we're getting birds from all over the world checking out these feeders. So you can kind of consider a bird feeder like what I like to say is like an international airport. There's a lot of activity from a lot of different places. So there's a lot of different contact, right? Which in any case, and especially with school time this time of year, there's always going to be diseases that can run around a little bit because everybody's meeting up with everybody, and that happens. So things like conjunctivitis or avian pox, salmonella, these are things that can happen. I find that at most feeders, conjunctivitis is the most common. This is something that's equivalent to pink eye in birds, and it happens a lot in your finches. Basically, their eyes can kind of get a little bit swollen shut. It's very hard for them to see, and that can be a life-threatening thing for them. So if you see cases like this, it's important to take down your feeders, leave them down for at least 2 weeks, clean them up, sanitize them, and we'll talk about that in a second. If you're able to grab the bird as well, you can contact a wildlife rehabber as well too. But basically, we want to prevent any of that from spreading for the bird's health as well. And like I said, this doesn't usually happen, but it's one of those things where it's important to mention. This is why cleaning and maintaining your feeders, just like the tools of any hobby, is very important to keep our birds happy and healthy. So, how do we kind of prevent these issues from happening? First off, maintenance and cleaning. This is the part of any hobby nobody likes to talk about, but it does have to happen. Usually it's recommended that you clean your feeders 1 to 2 times a month. If you've been feeding your birds for a while and never even thought about cleaning your feeders, that's okay. That's what I'm here for. So it's never too late to start as well. When it comes to cleaning, you do want to designate a separate space. You don't want to be cleaning this in your kitchen. Definitely consider a bucket or a plastic bin or a utility sink so that you can kind of have this stuff separate. And you are going to collect a variety of brushes to clean your feeders with. There is some for tube feeders, bird baths, or heavier feeders like the hopper feeders, things for hummingbird feeders and smaller glass feeders as well. So you've got lots of options on different types of brushes. You will have at least 2 to 3, depending on the situation. It doesn't hurt to have gloves if you do like that. And then, of course, it's always good to wash your hands all the same. And also having a soap of some kind is really good as well, so that you can kind of help work with that too. So when it comes to cleaning feeders, and I will admit these are my feeders, life has gotten in the way and I was well behind on cleaning them. So I figured I'd take some pictures so we knew how bad it could get and knew how good it was to clean them. So you want to start with soap and water. Getting a larger bucket is really good because you can just soak them for some time. Don't make it harder on yourself. If you have any feeders that are sticking out of the bucket or the bin, just flip it over until it gets a good soaking as well. What the soap does is it loosens and removes any debris that's left on the feeder, which is great so that all the surfaces are uncovered. At this point, you also want to scrub any of the places that the birds often come in contact with, so the ports, any of the perches, things like that as well, and then also any spots where you know you might have any mold too. This is why it's so important to be able to take apart your feeders as well overall, just to help get in all those little tiny spaces, right? So once you do the soap and water and you scrub, you can go ahead and rinse them off, which exposes all the parts of the feeder. Then you want to do a bleach solution to 1 part bleach or 9 parts water. Some people use vinegar in this step, and that's completely fine. But what this does is it basically sanitizes and kills any microorganisms. Oh my goodness. Microorganisms. Oh my gosh. Some days science doesn't want to work with you. The tiny things that we can't see, microorganisms, there we go. So any of those bacterias or mold that could be in that feeder basically sanitizes that so the birds don't have to worry. Then you want to go ahead and clean that up as well too and rinse it off so it's not transmitted to any of the birds or their food. With the bleach solution, you can use a spray and just spray your stuff down, let it sit for 10 to 15 minutes, and then go ahead and rinse it off as well too. Basically, we don't want any of that bleach to remain or any of that vinegar to remain, depending on what you do. Bird baths, if you have those, it is also important to clean those as well. In most cases, usually people are changing the water out in general every 2 to 3 days, which is completely fine. You do want to get in there and do a deep clean about the same amount of times as you clean your feeders, so 1 to 2 times a month or a little bit more, maybe once a week, depending on how hot it is, if you have any algae buildup, what's going on, how much activity it has. So these strong bristle brushes are a really good option. This guy right here, I like this guy. He does a good job for the bird baths, okay? Basically, he gets in there and removes any possible algae you might be dealing with. So clean that up, go ahead and rinse that off, which again removes the debris. And then you can use that bleach water spray to spray down the bird bath. If the bowl is removable, great. If the bird bath is light enough that you can kind of have it on its side so you know the birds won't check it out, great. If it's not, if you have a concrete bird bath, go ahead and get something like a garbage bag or like a plastic bag, put it on over that because we don't want the birds to investigate this while the bleach is doing its job. Once you've left it for 10 to 15 minutes, go ahead and rinse off and you're good to go. And those are just really important things to maintain the feeder so we have happy and healthy birds. That's like, I would say, the worst part of the bird feeding hobby, and honestly it's not that bad. So as long as you don't have too many bird feeders where it's overwhelming, then you're good to go. Lastly, bird feeding takes time and it takes patience. It's a very fun and relaxing hobby, but sometimes people can get stressed because of things they don't really know too much about. So here's some general tidbits as you're either getting started or moving through different seasons. First off, birds feed by sight, so it does take them time to find the feeders because they are creatures of habit. If you have a new feeder in a new location or a new feeder in a location that a bird feeder previously was, it's something new. The birds have to check it out, give them a few weeks to a month or so to really start picking up on that activity. Second, birds are influenced by many natural events. This includes weather patterns such as storms, or like we've had earlier this summer, the possible fires and smokes and things like that. They're also influenced by natural light cycles as well too when it comes to migration and things like that as well. They are affected by natural resources. So we talked about that. When there's a lot of natural food, things do slow down at the feeders. And if you have any predators in the area, depending on your location, we usually have to deal with a lot of hawks or feral cats. The birds know better. It does slow down activity at the feeders. And if you have any changes in your local habitat as well, such as construction, or maybe you've knocked down some trees, or maybe you're putting up some shrubs, that's going to adjust things that the birds have to get used to. This is, in fact, honestly, a wonderful and relaxing hobby that does bring us closer to nature in a way that we don't usually get throughout our daily life. So if you're looking into starting with the hobby, it's good for any age range, and it's a great time just to get closer to nature. The last thing, too, is we're not just dealing with the birds when we have these feeders out. You're going to have different wildlife like mammals or reptiles, hey, even amphibians, I don't know, that will be around, and you'll start to notice how this entire little ecosystem is completely connected. Insects too. So like this time of year, we say leave the leaves as it gets closer, because that leaves any insects to continue their life cycle, which is also a great food resource for our birds and other small mammals. So it's all connected, and it's really cool to kind of keep that in mind as you move forward with your bird feeding hobby. So I hope you guys found that interesting. It's definitely just the basics and maintenance, so sometimes it's not the most fun part. But for tuning in as well, I do have a $5 off $25 coupon code that's good for today. The code is bird feeding, so you're free to use that in store or through a phone order as well too. We'll be having a second presentation of this in store at 11 a.m. as well too. So once again, I do want to say thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you are new to the hobby and still need some help getting started, don't be afraid to ask your local Wild Birds Unlimited if that's an option. Or if you're not that close to one of us, feel free to give us a call and we can still help you out there too. That being said, thank you guys so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it, and I will see you guys next time. Have a great day and enjoy the birds.